This is E&P Audio, a service of Editor and Publisher Magazine. Since 1884, the authoritative voice of news publishing.
Welcome back for the fourth episode of E&P Reports, the official podcast from the staff of Editor and Publisher Magazine. I'm your host, Bob Andelman. This week, our emphasis is on sales training, as E&P Managing Editor Evelyn Mateos talks to two sales leaders, Nick Johnson, Head of Advertising at McClatchy, and independent sales trainer and consultant Janet DeGeorge. But first, Evelyn brings us the week's news headlines, followed by a special op-ed from new editor and publisher owner and publisher Mike Blinder. Evelyn?
Thanks, Bob. This week, the first edition of the Denver North Star was published on October 15th. According to CBS 4 in Denver, 29,000 copies of the publication were delivered to every door in Northwest Denver. In addition, another 1,000 copies are available at newspaper boxes around the area. Sabrina D'Agosta and David Sabados, who ran for city council last spring, teamed up to bring the new local paper to an area that has seen a void in its news coverage since the Denver Tribune folded 2 years ago. D'Agosta said, "It was hard for voters to differentiate between the candidates, so we saw an opportunity to come back and tell people what was going on in the community and give them more in-depth news in the neighborhoods." The second edition will be published in mid-November. On Sunday night, CNN condemned a video that was shown at a pro-Trump political conference last week. The Hollywood Reporter indicated that it was a doctored version of the scene from the film Kingsman: The Secret Service, which showed the president shooting and stabbing political rivals as well as members of media in the church. The victims included individuals with CNN logos over their faces. The network responded, "Sadly, this is not the first time that supporters of the president have promoted violence against the media in a video they apparently find entertaining, but it is by far and away the worst. The images depicted are vile and horrific." Variety recently published a cover story featuring CBS Evening News anchor Norah O'Donnell, who recently snared a much-coveted interview with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. O'Donnell pressed MBS about the one-year anniversary of the assassination of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. In editor and publisher news, last week we announced PJ Browning of the Post and Courier as our Publisher of the Year. You can read our profile on PJ and the work she is doing in next month's issue. In addition, Ebby Award finalists were announced today, and winners will be revealed next Wednesday, October 23rd. As always, please check out our website for the latest headlines in news publishing and subscribe to our newsletter.
Thank you, Evelyn. Next up, E&P publisher Mike Blinder makes his first appearance on the podcast with an opinion piece. Say it ain't so, Shep. Mike?
Hey, Bob. Thanks so much for having me on E&P Reports this week. I'll tell you, it all started on Friday afternoon, October 11th, 2019, at Gate B2 at the Atlanta airport. I was on my way home from a speech in New York City, and I was listening live at that moment on my Bluetooth, because I'm always listening to news while I'm traveling. I was listening to Fox News, the 3 o'clock news hour hosted by Shep Smith. And when I heard Shep resign his position, it was like a truck hit me. So as soon as I got into my seat on the flight, I started crafting what I guess you would call my first editorial for Editor and Publisher Magazine, the magazine I'm honored to be publisher of. So here goes. I'll admit it, I'm a news junkie. I always have been. When stories break, it's not uncommon to find me monitoring multiple sites and networks, seeking out all sides of a story. I also believe that a free press is essential to a democracy. I'm convinced that more than 200 years ago, some very imperfect men crafted a very, very perfect document. They saw the future. They would see it strained. They would see it crunched, rolled into a ball, and possibly set on fire. But that document is the one to which our elected leaders pledge their support. Now, I've admired Shep Smith, not for many years. I mean, I've admired him not just because of his amazing reporting skills, but also in recent years for as much as his courage and strength in maintaining a focus on what he knew his real job description was, a journalist. One of Webster's definitions of journalism is, quote, writing characterized by a direct presentation of facts or description of events without an attempt of interpretation. Now, that's one of the facets I love about this industry I serve, the news publishing newspaper industry. News publishers have, for the most part, made it a point to clearly separate the solid news based on facts and reporting from editorial, which is clearly labeled as opinion. Now, Webster's defines opinion as a view, judgment, or appraisal formed in the mind about a particular matter. Now, many news publishers today actually put varying opinions, sometimes opposing opinions, side by side on the very page. Now, it is obvious to all of us today that the three major cable news networks that serve the U.S. have moved more and more into blending both journalistic and opinion-based news, where regardless of which of the three major networks you tune to, you'll see some facts presented first in a story. Some may leave some facts out, and then the anchors interviewing reporters to gain their opinions on the facts, which then puts an editorial slant on the story. It is this seamless blending of journalism and editorial opinion that, well, according to some pundits, is one of the main reasons why we're so tribal today in our polarized society. In short, news consumers are having trouble separating news from opinion. Shep Smith was one of Fox News' first hires when Roger Ailes launched it into the American news ecosystem on October 7th, 1996. Now, during his 23-year tenure, Shep found it harder and harder being a journalist as more and more Fox News anchors moved further away from the strict reporting standards and it delivering facts and wrapped it into opinions that were embraced by Rupert Murdoch's politics. Personally, I applauded Fox News, especially for keeping Shep on the air in a 3 p.m. time slot, because it angered far-right viewers who resented his insistence on simply reporting documented facts that stood in stone-cold opposition to the conspiracy theories and unfounded propaganda that was broadcast elsewhere on the network schedule, mostly in the evenings. And most importantly, if you watch the 3 p.m. time slot religiously, as I always did, you would notice that most news anchors on Fox and other networks would instantly, after reporting the story, introduce a panel to unpack it and add their opinions. Now, Shep would simply pause after a story and allow the viewer to digest the facts, and then he'd move on to the next story. Fox News reported that Shep left our news community on his own. He was not fired. It was reported that management at the cable news network reportedly asked him to stay, but Shep could not remain on the air when presenting truth only on its own merits became much more difficult in today's cable news environment. His final telecast was something to be remembered. And I think we all have to remember the words he said at 2:58 p.m. on October 11th, 2019. He said, quote, "Even in our currently polarized nation, it is my hope that the facts will win the day, that the truth will always matter, that journalism and journalists will thrive." If I may say, Shep, please come back, or at least don't stay away long. We now need you more than ever. Bob?
Now, here's E&P's managing editor, Evelyn Mateos, who interviews two sales training experts, Nick Johnson, head of advertising at McClatchy, and independent sales trainer and consultant, Janet DeGeorge. Evelyn?
Thanks for joining us for E&P Reports, Nick. You recently answered a few questions for us in the October issue for the feature Reinventing the Wheel, where we asked sales leaders like yourself to reinvent our business model. And we wanted to give you the space to expand on those ideas here. But first, tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your background.
Hi, Evelyn. Thanks for the opportunity here. So I'm Nick Johnson. I'm the head of sales at McClatchy. We're a group of 30 newspapers across the country, from the Miami Herald in Florida to the Sacramento Bee in California. My background personally is I started in advertising after graduated from college, and I was a traditional account executive in New York and in Tokyo. And then in 1997, I went to work for CNN Digital and had been in digital media sales ever since. So obviously, I love this segment of our industry, and I'm psyched to be in the middle of it.
Great. And how did those past positions kind of help you in your current position? What did they teach you?
Yeah, I've been fortunate in working in traditional media companies that are learning and growing digital as a core competency, and understanding how to be a digital expert while collaborating in large traditional media organizations. But I've also been able to work in small digital pure plays. I've worked at startups where change is constant and disruptive. And I think those combination of things have been very useful in this job, where we're really working hard to reposition ourselves as a digital company. And in order to do that, you have to make big changes and evolve quickly. And so I've been able to bring both sort of that entrepreneurial spirit into a big traditional company, but I think the experiences at places like CNN and NBC allow you to understand the personalities and the importance of that traditional business while you're trying to build digital up.
Great. So now kind of switching gears and looking back at our Q&A, if you had to start a sales model from scratch today, what would it look like?
So it's an awesome question. I think that what you really need in today's environment are very consultative sellers that understand the full continuum of options available to digital marketers and the competencies you need to have as a digital publisher. So really beginning with solution builders who can come in, listen to a client's needs, and quickly assess what to offer them in as targeted a way as possible. I think the days of slinging products and sponsors as sort of the lead-in are no longer relevant. I think you really have to understand that there's a breadth of KPIs or key performance indicators that a brand is looking for, and that in many cases, if you have a suite of tools, using the right one at the right time is important. And then on the flip side of that, obviously, understanding the business side of what some of these products you want a profitable sales organization and make sure that you're building the right solutions and thinking about sort of the cost of goods. That's a lot of things, but what it starts with, I think, is sellers that are good listeners, strategic thinkers, can sit down and listen to objectives are, ask the right questions to sort of refine what it is that you need to bring to the table in order to be successful. And that's kind of the front end, I think. The reality, I think, in a digital-only world is that your clients and our advertising partners have access to real-time data and understand when things are working or not working very, very quickly. So in addition to having good sellers on the front end, having place help look at the performance of a campaign, quickly assess whether those KPIs are being met, and if they are, maybe moving things around to double down on the things that are working really well, and if they're not, optimizing those campaigns and making sure that dollars are being spent wisely on behalf of our clients. For us, is we have a full service agency as part of the organization called Accelerate. So in addition to sort of conventional media solutions, video ads, advertising, programmatic, sponsorship, branded content, we're actually able to bring in a full suite of digital agency solutions into our partners. And I think that also requires a really strong understanding of the business, because you're talking about things like SEO, SEM, you're talking about geofencing, you're talking about reputation management, you might be talking about creative development. I think one of the real benefits to having that capability at our company is that those are sort of stickier relationships as well. If you're going to be an agency partner as well as a media partner, it really is a partnership more so than a transaction.
Okay, great. So yeah, it sounds like the people on your team kind of know the continuum. They know their KPIs. Are there any tools that you think those people on your team would absolutely need to be provided with?
Yeah, I think the question that you asked me was a good one, which is what would you do if you could build a sales team from the ground up? And obviously, when you work at a 160-year-old company, you have a lot of good people in that organization. And when you're trying to drive this change to digital quickly, Not everybody shows up with the same skill set. Obviously, that's just the nature of the business. So I think the other thing that I'm very fortunate to have sort of in our toolkit here at McClatchy is we have a training platform, which really is just people and a location called Blueprint, which is really a critical part of both onboarding new employees, but rotating longtime employees through, and that can be everything from how to qualify a great lead. That can be everything from how to effectively and consistently use Salesforce as a forecasting tool and how you should be inputting information into that. And certainly it is a platform for us to train and drive digital. So in many places, branded content has been a thing for a long time. In McClatchy, it's really new. And there's both the art and science of what branded content is. It's about obviously creating great video and putting the brand in the center of that in an authentic way that feels natural for that video. But then there's also the distribution side and making sure that that video is finding itself being delivered to a targeted audience, both on-site and off-site where appropriate. And so you can't just launch a branded content division and assume everybody understands what it is. You've got to make sure that there's a mechanism for training people up on it and having the resource to help them as they're learning it in the early stages before they become bilingual in that competency.
What is the biggest risk you took in your organization when it came to sales? It could be in McClatchy, maybe something beforehand. How did it go, and would you do it again?
I think that we made a pretty big decision here back in April to really move from sort of a locally driven sales organization to a centralized sales organization. And basically, the strategy behind that was we have a lot of different ways that we sell and a lot of really, really strong sellers. The organizational change was about making sure that you were able to look at the sales channel. So the example of a sales channel is we have a strategic sales channel that's focusing on our larger partners. We have a local sales team that's focused on sort of mid-tier deals. We have a national digital sales team and a couple others. And I think the objective was by the time you got to the local market, you had very different sort of skill sets or sales teams, and consistently pushing down priorities to those teams could be challenging because it was so far downstream. By creating this channel structure, I have one head of strategic sales and everybody rolls up to them. They have a weekly call, they reinforce priorities. Everybody knows what their marching orders are, and we have a much better handle around that part of the business. So I think that refactoring of the sales team, that it was grounded in 160 something years worth of legacy into something new was a decision that we a number of us took. But it was a big swing, and I would absolutely do it again because I think it's brought organization and an ability to mobilize the teams in a much more efficient way.
Yeah, it sounds like it definitely paid off. McClatchy's doing some great stuff. So any big plans like that for the upcoming year?
I think a big part of this upcoming year has less to do organizationally. I think you touched on some of the tools, and I think scaling Blueprint in a new way, rather than it being a destination, which is historically what it is. Leave your market, go to Blueprint, spend a week there with immersive training, and shut yourself off from the outside world. That's also sort of challenging to scale. And quite frankly, with things like a podcast, you could train by doing more informal sessions. So I think for us, we have this training platform called Blueprint that we'd like to mobilize in new ways. And instead of this being a once or twice a year thing, have it be a platform through which every week you can learn something, or if you need to push a new product through the system, leverage that Blueprint brand and find a medium through which you can disperse that training more effectively. I think that's a big one for us. I think the other priority for us is just, again, when you make a big sales transformation, with the organization, you got to get people comfortable in their new roles. And so we've spent the better part of the year having people settle into their new roles. I think the other really, really big push for us is to make sure that every seller in the organization understands how big a priority digital is, and putting that at the forefront of everything, not at the expense of print, but truly being bilingual and making sure that digital is at the forefront. Because, for many of our advertisers, we're not talking about advertisers that necessarily are in the Fortune 100. We have large casino partners, we have large CBD partners, we have large partners in health, but not all of them have a traditional advertising agency partner, and some of them don't have a sophisticated digital person there, and so we have a unique opportunity to go in and be that partner for them. But that really starts when you start positioning the company as a digital first company, and so I think that's a big push for 2020.
Great. Is there any advice that you would maybe give to salespeople for the upcoming year?
Yeah, I think that they've heard me tell them a lot, and that is we need to be focused on double-digit digital growth to every salesperson in the company, that they should lean into training wherever it's available. I do also think, and I talked about this a lot, is you also really have to be a student of this industry, because on the digital side, it's changing constantly and evolving constantly. And you either have an innate passion for that, or you have to force yourself to stay on top of it. And I don't have a bias either way. Just care about the fact that it's a really interesting space, and every week something else is changing. You've seen, if not, I think you've seen 3 pretty big mergers: Taboola, Outbrain, Pop Sugar, and Discovery. I'm spacing on the digital holding brand name within Discovery. But the world is changing very quickly, so the landscape is changing very quickly, and you need to know what's happening out there.
Right. I mean, yeah, here we are doing a podcast, right?
Yeah.
And
a video one, and I didn't even know it'd be video, or I probably would have shaved.
Well, thank you so much, Nick. Where can people find you to learn more?
Sure. So I've got a great Twitter handle. It's old school. So I'm @MediaGuy, and that's probably the best place to go.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Next up, we have Classified Executive Training Sales Manager, Sales Trainer, and Consultant, Janet DeGeorge. Thanks for joining us for E&P Reports, Janet. You recently answered a few questions for us in the October issue for the feature Reinventing the Wheel, where we asked sales leaders like yourself to reinvent our business model, and we wanted to give you the space to expand on those ideas here. First, tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your background.
I've been in newspapers for 40 years and started at the San Jose Mercury News while I went to graduate school, and became a classified manager there, and then became a recruitment manager down in Southern California, then came to Arizona, and I was the classified director of the Scottsdale and Mesa Tribune. I was also a vice president of the Western Classified Association. I've spoken at numerous conferences, done lots of webinars, and have about 300 customers.
Wow, okay. And what was the path to consulting to where you are now?
I lost my job, so I had a 6-month non-compete from the Mesa Tribune to the Arizona Republic, and that was in 2000. And I thought, okay, well, during these 6 months, I'll call some people and let them know that, I'm changing jobs. And they started asking me to train. And then I thought, okay, I'll do this for a year, and then, I'll do it for 2 years. And now it's 20 years because the need is so great, as the classifieds just started getting destroyed from Craigslist and then the recession, that even to this day, every day I get emails from people who need help.
And you love it too, right?
Yes, because even though I had tremendous training and experience, every newspaper's taught me something different. And I can pass that on to the next customers. Plus, all my former customers will see it, and I could put it into webinars, which I do for many of the associations for free, and just try and get the word out. Otherwise, there is no place to get classified information anymore.
So looking back, if you had to start a sales model from scratch today, what would it look like?
It would be no silos. It would be one big advertising department made of inside sales and outside sales. And the proper accounts would go to the right people. Not everybody needs a sales call. And an inside rep can talk to 40 people before an outside rep even gets in their car. So according to what type of an account it is, who does the work is what's been locked in, not only by most papers, but by accounting systems that just measure revenue in these very old ways prior to computers. I did a lot of training in Europe, and their newspapers are all about the call centers. Their outside reps are basically PR people who take customers to lunch or go golfing, and all the sales are done, even radio and TV sales, by inside sales. So because of the massive amount of people they can contact during the day, inside sales really is the future, and yet most newspapers have cut that sales force to nothing.
Right. And so in your experience, I'm sure you've seen all kinds of structures nowadays. What type of sales structures have you found just do not work?
When there's too few reps, I've been to newspapers and have had sales reps crying because they have 3,000 accounts. And when the newspaper, during the recession, a lot, newspaper publishers had to do whatever it took to save their papers, and I understand that. But now that the economy's back, they want their revenue back. But if they had 10 people before, 2 people cannot do that. They had 5 people before, 1 person can't do that. And they have to realize that if they want that revenue again, they have to staff up. So that's the problem out there, staffing.
Okay, yeah. And any structures that you came across that impressed you, maybe even surprised you?
Yeah, and Tupelo, Mississippi, long-term classified manager, she just recently retired. She had built the most impressive sales structure where they did over $500,000 just in special sections. And Tupelo is a very interesting place, but they would have special sections for Elvis's birthday.
Wow.
I mean, you name it, she did it. So her inside sales staff, and they still had 6 or 7 inside reps at the time, were always selling all the time. And they were, from the time they were hired to outbound call and sell new business. And most newspapers still hire people for customer service, and then they're afraid to sell. So yes, when you're staffed right and you're hiring the right people from the get-go, anything's possible.
Great. So now switching gears just a little bit, what was your biggest concern 5 years ago, and is it the same today?
5 years ago, just coming out of the recession, what really scared me was how poor online classifieds were for newspapers. Their ad order entry was a mess. They never promoted it. So, most people want to place ads themselves at their convenience, not the newspaper hours. And yet they just let that slide. Now, I have to preface this in saying people come to me when they've hit rock bottom. So I see broken papers. The papers that are doing fine don't call on me. So I'm sure there's ones that really got their act together with their ad order entry and a beautiful classified, a modern looking section with lots of color and pictures and displays. But the ones I see, no, they've lost everything.
When do you recommend, are there any signs at all that say, okay, maybe we should call Janet?
Well, they see their revenue just about disappear. Now, some don't wait to the last minute, and some, they have like 5 ads left, and we have to start from scratch, redesigning, remodeling, re-rates, everything. Some that come when they're just halfway broken, something that still has good bones, we can build on. But there's so many that just let it slide that we have to just start as if we were starting a brand new section.
And so are there any other concerns you can think of that kind of popped up in the last 5 years?
Yeah.
How did those play out?
Many newspapers still want to charge like it's $19.99 and they're the only game in town. And that doesn't work anymore. And I encourage every paper to revisit their rates and start with how much does that newsprint page cost you out the door? And how much do you want to sell it? There are some 20,000 circ papers still trying to get $12,000 for an employment advertising page. That just doesn't work anymore. So all the rates have to be looked at, and sales reps have to be well trained to sell what's right to the customer. But just many are. They gave up their training managers a long time ago. That's why I'm still busy after 20 years.
Okay, so what is the biggest risk that you took in your organization when it came to sales? How did it go, and would you do it again?
The biggest risk was a very interesting one in Kankakee, Illinois, with a management team that were risk takers. And we wanted to start an employment section with 4 people who never sold it before. And so I constantly have to come up with brand new ideas to go back into the market because the same solution doesn't work for every paper.
Right.
So we decided to create a 16-page employment section. We gave each of the reps their accounts, and they had the choice of selling it at full price, selling it at 50% off, or giving it away for free. But we wanted them each to sell 2 full pages. So it was very interesting. We had 2 outside reps who wanted to make extra money. They basically gave everything away for free. And we had a sales supports person who gave half away for free. And then a new hire that the management found at a flea market selling her goods. Wow. She sold everything. So we got our section. We made $17,000, which was amazing for just employment. And then we direct mailed it to 400 of their top employers to say, look what we're doing now. And that set them off. That was, maybe 5 years ago. And to this day, they still have a very successful employment section.
Good. So now also I want to get into, in the article you mentioned that when the East Valley Tribune was sold to Thomson Newspapers, it was like time travel.
Right.
So quickly, changing to a fully functional sales team. So, and I know that this might be something that other newspapers have also had to deal with. Is there anything that you would like to point out, that's important to remember when making a quick transition, or should we just try to avoid those altogether?
Well, if you don't change, you're going to slowly die, especially if your revenue is going downhill. That means your audience is saying something's wrong. One of the things that concerns me, even though I think it's just going to be a fact, is the artists on site. The artists were the heart and soul of every team. They got to know the customers just as well as the sales rep. And artists think and hear differently. So, they would go out to the new customer with the sales rep. And while the rep is thinking half page every other week and what online, the artist is creating that ad in their mind, what exactly the words the advertiser was saying were turning into pictures. That's how they described it to me. And they would make these incredible ads that sold every time. So now so many newspapers outsource artists, so there's not that collaborative conversation between the sales rep and the artist, or the artist and the advertiser. And that's been lost forever. So you really can't go to a team format unless the artist is part of the team. It's the whole setup of what makes it successful.
Okay, so communication.
But having all the right people, having the right salespeople, the support person, and the artist on the same team. That's what makes it a team.
So now looking forward to 2020 as this year is quickly coming to a close, what are your priorities for the upcoming year?
Well, now that I don't, when I traveled, small papers could not afford me.
Right.
And now that I work from home, I was really able to bring my prices down. Plus, there's not expenses of travel, which would be $3,000 a week right there. So I can work with small papers now, and even if I just raise their revenue 10 to 20,000 a month, they're thrilled. Where a big paper is looking for another $1 million a year. So the small papers are so grateful, and it really keeps them going just to bring their classifieds alive. And I just get a lot of joy from that.
Yeah, I know you had mentioned it before in the article as well. What is your favorite part about working with them?
Well, one, you work literally with the owner and the publisher, so you're at the top. And it takes longer because there's so few resources. The artist I'm working with may be the only artist at the paper. But it's the fact that if that newspaper dies, that community loses its voice and it loses the history of their town, because that's what the newspaper is recording every day. And we recently, well, not recently, but in the last few years, I live in an area, Gilbert, Arizona, which is called the East Valley of the Phoenix area. And when the East Valley Tribune went out of business, we have no newspaper. We have, a little weekly here and there and some little startups, but no real newspaper. And that really worries me.
Right. Thanks, Janet. Where can people find you to learn more information?
Well, you just Google my name and it'll bring them to my website, classifiedexecutivetraining.com. Or I give out my personal email, janetdegeorge@aol.com. That way it gets right to me. And, I don't take on every customer. I look at their e-edition. I want to see their revenue. I have to know what their production capabilities are and what they really want to do. And if their heart's in it as much as mine would be, then we'll go for it. And literally, I do a lot of pro bono too, because there's some papers that are about to die and they don't have to. I just try and pump revenue in. I'm like, look, if you can pay me something next year, do it. Otherwise, let's just get this business back.
Great. Well, I can tell you have a lot of passion for what you do. Thanks again for joining us, and thanks for listening to E&P Reports.
Thank you, Evelyn. Be sure to read our October issue to learn more from Nick Johnson, Janet DeGeorge, and other industry sales leaders. That wraps up this week's edition of E&P Reports, the official podcast of Editor and Publisher Magazine. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Please subscribe in YouTube's, iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Luminary, or wherever you watch or listen to your favorite podcasts. And if you'd like to rate and review the show, we'd sure appreciate seeing that too. I'm your host, Bob Andelman, saying thanks for watching, thanks for listening. And please consider checking out my other podcast, Mr. Media Interviews, now in its 13th year. Nah, no kidding. 13th year. That's mrmedia.com. Let's talk, edit, and publish next week. Bye, everybody.
This is E&P Audio, a service of Editor and Publisher Magazine. Since 1884, the authoritative voice of news publishing.